Hi. Morning, Crow. Hello, hello. How are you? Thank you for redeeming all of those. I appreciate it. How was your morning so far? You're welcome. I'm better. Hola, Pookie. How are you? How are you feeling? Hey, Chewy. Good morning. And I'm glad to hear you're better, Crow. Good. That's really good to hear, Crow. I'm glad to hear you're feeling better. Oh, food poisoning. I'm so sorry. Bit better, bit worse. Uh-oh. Wait, what do you mean? And I'm glad to hear you're a bit better, but hope things turn out better for you, I think is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, mentally feeling way better. Physically, I feel more broken for some reason. It seems like you haven't been able to catch a break. Or, I don't know. Still, regardless. I'm glad you're mentally feeling way better, though. I'm not healing either. Well, it's only been, what, like 24 hours? For what you've endured, that's gonna take a lot more time, I feel like. I mean, since being injured, I've barely recovered and I shouldn't. Maybe you should check yourself back in? What do you think? Breadsticks taste like cardboard, the basket after. Did fine. You ate the basket? Curious. No? Or were you joking? I'm considering going back. Pookie, if you're not feeling any better and you're in a lot of pain, like, and you feel physically broken, might not be a bad idea. Oh, I see. Okay, so you're referring to the breadsticks in the basket after we're fine. So maybe it was just the one then. Is that what you're trying to say? Well, either way, I think today I'm going to try something out a little differently. So we'll see how this goes. I'll chat with you guys for a little bit and then go right into it. One second. I apologize, guys. I'll be right back. One second.
Bruh.
Never mind. That was so weird. Okay. I'm gonna type right into the mouth. Oh, that sounds awful. And good morning, Doom. Good morning. How are you? Waking up? It is quite early, so hopefully that process goes well for you. And thank you for redeeming that, Crow. Crow, but you still streamed at all. Maybe you shouldn't have, but that's not my place to say. You felt like doing it, that is your call. Not anybody else's. Pookie, I really think you should, especially if you're feeling abdominal pain. Might not be a bad idea to go as soon as you can. I took it easy. Good. Good. Still. Good morning, Wheel. Hello. How are you doing? Hopefully, how's everything going with you? Contacts keep blurring. This should be fun. Pookie, yes, if that's the case, you should definitely go as soon as you possibly can. Okay? And I mean that. That's not a good sign. Feeling really good. I am glad to hear, Wheel. I'm really glad to hear. Mm-hmm. Definitely. You should absolutely be going, Pookie. Hunting the blue locks? Well, thank you. Thank you, Doom. I used to wear this all the time. My ninja army. Actually, it's a bit more of a light purple, but it does look kind of blue, doesn't it? Yes, all the more reason, Pookie. Please. Go. It's the last time I'll say anything about it. Okay. Good. You better. Alright? Good. Okay. So, I wanted to try something out a little bit different today. Wait, oh, that color looks good. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I wanted to try something a little bit different, but that does mean a couple of different things. I might not be as responsive, but this has been highly requested in terms of something that I should try. The bull needs a matching wig. Nah. I think Steve, the Highland cow, is doing just fine where he is. And with what he's got. But, so, if I don't respond right away while I'm doing this, there's a reason for it. You can't tell by the title of the stream. I was gonna read a book. It's on here. So, we are going to read the book, The War of the Worlds, by H.G. Wells. A little different today. A little bit more quiet, a little bit more calm. Ew, I'm so in. I mean, I think it'll be good. I love this book. Good book. Thank you. Thank you. I found out that it's one of, or I guess now a few, possibly few, one of my followers' favorite books. But I don't think they're here, so that's just too bad for them. Oh. Either way, it's public domain, so I'm able to read it just as is, which is good. So I'll do my best for you guys. But again, that does mean I might not be able to respond quite as much. Speak of the devil and they shall appear. Look at that cutie. Well, hey, Tiger. Long time no see. Speaking of the person I was talking about originally, Tiger, look at what we're doing today. Are you good if I imagine Morgan Freeman reading it? Doom, of course. Absolutely. I read a really sad nonfiction book. It made me cry. No. Kind of stream I came for on this stressful time. I will do my best. Love it. Either way, we'll see how it goes, okay? We just get right into it? Again, this does mean I might not be as responsive, but I hope you guys understand. Okay? Cool. Alrighty. Book 1, The Coming of the Martians, Chapter 1, The Eve of the War. There is not a reading category for this reason. Can we make you laugh? Try not to. I would appreciate that. There isn't because of different copyrights and everything. So I'm trying this out here for right now. Chapter 1, The Eve of the War. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's and yet as mortal as his own, that as men busy themselves about their various concerns, that they were scrutinized and studied perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacency, men went to and fro, over this globe about their little affairs, serene in their assurance of their empire over matter. It is possible that the infusoria
Can I get a Hoya?
under the microscope do the same. Really, Chewy? Really? I will redeem that in just a second, Crow. Hiya? No one gave a thought to the older worlds of space as the sources of human danger, or thought of them only to dismiss the idea of life upon them as impossible or improbable. Too bad. It is curious to recall. Might as well turn off sounds for reading. What do you mean, like the music? I think it's too much. The alerts. I mean, why not? It does make it fun, and that's okay. I don't mind. I can keep roughly track of where I'm at. I don't mind. It is curious to recall some of the mental habits sitting across on the floor watching Gene Coffin. Oh, Doom, you're precious. It is curious to recall some of the mental habits of those departed days. At most, terrestrial men fancied there might be other men upon Mars, perhaps inferior to themselves, and ready to welcome a missionary enterprise. Yet across the gulf of space, minds that are to our minds as ours are to those of the beasts that perish. Intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic. regarding this earth with envious eyes, and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. And early in the 20th century came the Great Delusionment. I'm gonna go, Rain. I've got a really bad tingling feeling. My kidneym have bust. Good, yes, please be safe, okay? Please be safe. Okay. The planet Mars. I scarcely need remind the reader, revolves about the sun at a mean distance of 140 million miles, and the light and heat received from the sun is barely half of that received by this world. It must be, if the nebular hypothesis has any truth, older than our world, and long before this earth ceased to be molten, life upon its surface must have begun its course. The fact that it is scarcely 1/7 of the volume of the earth must have accelerated its cooling to the temperature at which life could begin. It has air and water and all that is necessary for the support of animated existence. Yet so vain is man, and so blinded by his vanity, that no writer, up to the very end of the 19th century, expressed any idea that intelligent life might have developed there far, or indeed at all, beyond its earthly level. Nor was it generally understood that, since Mars is older than our Earth, with scarcely a quarter of the superficial area and remoter from the Sun, it necessarily follows that it is not only more distant from time's beginning, but nearer its end. The secular cooling that must someday overtake our planet has already gone far indeed with our neighbor. Its physical condition is still largely a mystery, but we know now that even in its equatorial region, the midday temperature barely approaches that of our coldest winter. Its air is much more attenuated than ours. Its oceans have shrunk until they cover but a third of its surface. And as its slow seasons change, huge snow caps gather and melt about either pole and periodically inundate its temperature zones. The last stage of exhaustion, which to us is still incredibly remote, has become a present-day problem for the inhabitants of Mars. The immediate pressure of necessity has brightened their intellects, enlarged their powers, and hardened their hearts. And looking across space with instruments and intelligences such as we have scarcely dreamed of, they see at its nearest distance only 35 million of miles sunward of them a morning star of hope, our own warmer planet, green with vegetation and gray with water, with the cloudy atmosphere eloquent of fertility, with glimpses through its drifting cloud wisps of broad stretches of populous country and narrow, navy-crowded seas. And we men, the creatures who inhabit the earth, must be to them at least as alien and lonely as are the monkeys and lemurs to us. The intellectual side of man already admits that life is an incessant struggle for existence, and it would seem that this too is the belief of the minds upon Mars. The world is far gone in its cooling, and this world is still crowded with life, or crowded only with what they regard as inferior animals. To carry warfare sunward is indeed their only escape from the destruction that generation after generation creeps upon them. And before we judge them too harshly, we must remember— no worries, Wheel. We must remember what ruthless and utter destruction our own species has wrought, not only upon animals, such as vanished bison and the dodo, but upon its inferior races. The Tasmanians, in spite of their human likeness, were entirely swept out of existence in a war of extermination waged by European immigrants in the space of 50 years. Are we such apostles of mercy as to complain if Martians warred in the same spirit? Interesting. The Martians seem to have calculated their descent with amazing subtlety? Words are hard. Their mathematical learning is evidently far in excess of ours, and to have carried out their preparations with a well-nigh perfect unanimity. Had our instruments permitted it, We might have seen the gathering trouble far back in the 19th century. Men like Schiaparelli watched the red planet. It's odd, by the by, that for countless centuries Mars has been the star of war, but failed to interpret the fluctuating appearances of markings they mapped so well. All the time the Martians must have been getting ready. One second. Okay, alright. Oh, I know. No, sorry, something was going on in the background, and I wasn't sure if you guys would be able to hear that. It's acting weird. How so? Can you guys still hear me? Okay. Yeah. Cool. Thank you for the stretch, girl. Ads. Alright. I'll wait a few seconds then. Yeah, that is unfortunately not my, not from my end, but I apologize. This should be good for now, but I might pause if it permits. Let's see. Okay. On to ads times 2. My condolences. Alright. During the opposition of 1894, a great light was seen on the illuminated part of the disk, first at the Lick Observatory, then on the Peloton of Nice. Thank you, Chewy, for the 200 biddies. I appreciate you. Stop tooting, cow. Imagine. But I might pause while that's going on. If it happens again, I apologize, you guys. Okay. Alrighty. Then by Peloton of Nice, and then by other observers. English readers head of its first in the issue of Nature dated August 2nd. I am inclined to think that this blaze may have been causing the huge gun and the vast pit sunk into their planet. I don't need to apologize. I mean, not planned, but I feel like I needed to. I don't hear anything. People I live with have their own PCs, and for some reason there was a weird noise coming from it, so that's why. I am inclined to think that this blaze may have been the casting of the huge gun and the vast pit sunk into their planet. Beware of a sudden bang. Yeah, they're working on it right now. But for now, I suppose we keep going. Alrighty. I'm inclined to think that this blaze may have been the casting of the huge gun and the vast pit sunk into their planet, from which their shouts were fired at us. Peculiar markings, as yet unexplained, were seen near the site of the outbreak during the next 2 oppositions. I'm trying to. No, they know. They know. Alrighty. Actually, a bit of water might be good. It was quite shocking. Yeah, that sounds very serious. Right. Oh my god. Why of all times does my throat decide to do this? Okay. Should be okay. Is that you in the background? You mean with Steve? No. No. Peculiar markings, as yet unexplained, were seen near the site of that outbreak during the next two oppositions. A storm burst upon us, upon us 6 years ago now. As March approached opposition, Lavelle of Java set the wires of the astronomical exchange palpitating with the amazing intelligence of a huge outbreak of incandescent gas upon the planet. It had occurred towards midnight of the 12th, and the spectroscope to which he had at once resorted, indicating a mass of flaming gas. I'm going to say a piece of chiefly hydrogen, moving with an enormous velocity towards this Earth. This jet of fire had become invisible about 12:15. He compared it to a colossal puff of flame, suddenly and violently squirted out of the planet, as flaming gas rushed out of a gun. A singularly appropriate phrase it proved, yet the next day there was nothing of this in the papers except a little note in the Daily Telegraph, and the world went in ignorance of one of the gravest dangers that ever threatened the human race. Oh my goodness. I might not have heard of the eruption at all had I not met Ogilvy, the well-known astronomer. Oh my gosh, why is that so hard to say? At Ottershaw. He was immensely excited at the news, and in the excess of his feelings invited me up to take a turn with him that night in a scrutiny of the red planet. Good morning, Day. In spite of all that has happened here, I still remembered that vigil very distinctly. The black and silent observatory, the shadowed lantern throwing a feeble glow upon the floor in the corner, the steady ticking of the clockwork of the telescope, the little slit in the roof, an oblong profundi with the stardust streaked across it. Ogilvy? Oh my goodness. Moved about, invisible but audible. Looking through the telescope, one saw a circle of deep blue and the little round planets swimming in the field. It seemed like such a little thing, so bright and small and still, faintly marked with transverse stripes, and slightly flattened from the perfect sound. But so little it was, so silvery warm, a pin's head of light. It was as if it quivered. But really, this was the telescope vibrating, with activity of clockwork that kept the planet in view. Gonna nap while you're reading? No worries, Tiger. No worries. As I watched, the planet seemed to grow larger and smaller, to advance and recede. But that was simply that my eye was tired. Say what? I feel like chat just got a whole lot more spicy and I didn't even know. Alright. As I watched, the planet seemed to grow larger and larger. Oh wait, I already read that. I apologize. 40 millions of miles it was from us, more than 40 millions of miles of void. Do people realize the immensity of vacancy in which the dust of the material universe swims? Near it in the field, I remember, were 3 faint points of light, 3 telescopic stars, infinitely remote, and all around it was the unfathomable darkness of empty space. You know how that blackness looks on a frosty starlit night? On telescope it seems far profounder, and invisible to me because it was so remote and small. Why One second, let me try and find my spot again. You know how that blackness looks upon a frosty starlit night? In a telescope it seems far profounder, and invisible to me because it was so remote and small, flying swiftly and steadily towards me across the incredible distance, drawing nearer every minute by so many thousands of miles. Now, everybody behave and chat, okay? Don't make me use that voice. That includes you too, Chewie. That includes everybody in here. And steadily towards me across the incredible distance, drawing near every minute by so many thousands of miles, came the thing that they were sending us. The thing that was to bring so much struggle and calamity and death to the earth. I never dreamed of it. Then, as I watched, no one on Earth dreamed of that nearing missile. That night, too, there was another jetting out of gas from the distant planet. I saw it. A reddish flash at the edge, the slightest projection of the outline, just as the chronometer struck midnight. Chronometer? Chronometer. And at that, I told Ogilvy, and he took my place. The night was warm, and I was thirsty. I went stretching my legs clumsily and feeling my way in the darkness to the little table where the siphon stood, while Ogilvy exclaimed at the streamer of gas that came toward us. The night another invisible missile started on its way to the Earth from Mars in just a second or so. Crow? This is the last warning. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. Trying to find my spot. Let's see. Okay, I think I see it. That night, too, there was another jetting out of gas from the distant planet. I saw it, a reddish flash of light, the slightest projection of the outline, just as the chronometer struck midnight. And at that I told Ogilvy, and he took my place. The night was warm, and I was thirsty, and I went stretching my legs, clumsily feeling my way in the darkness to the little table where the siphon stood, while Ogilvy exclaimed at the streamer of gas that came towards us. That night, another invisible missile started on its way to the Earth from Mars. Just a second or so under 24 hours after the first one. I remember how I sat on the table there in the blackness, with patches of green and crimson swimming before my eyes. I wish I had a light to smoke by, a little suspecting the meaning of the minute gleam I had seen and all that it would presently bring me. Ogilvy watched till 1 and then gave it up, and we lit the lantern and walked over to his house. Down below in the darkness were Ottershaw and Chertsey and all their hundreds of people sleeping in peace. Hi, Pui. Welcome on in. I hope you're doing well. He was full of speculation that night about the condition of Mars and scoffed at the vulgar idea of its having inhabitants who were signaling us. His idea was that meteorites might fall in a heavy shower upon the planet, or that a huge volcanic explosion was in progress. He pointed out to me how unlikely it was that organic evolution had taken the same direction into adjacent planets. I'm glad to hear you're fine, Pui. Too much green. Just a little bit, huh? The chances against anything manlike on Mars are 1,000,000 to 1. Stop it, behave. Now, Crow, Chewie's just fine. To be fair, you did provoke. Just bear that in mind. His idea was that meteorites might be falling in a heavy shower upon the planet, or that a huge volcanic explosion was in progress. He pointed out to me how unlikely it was that the organic evolution had taken the same direction in the two adjacent planets. The chances against anything man-like on Mars are 1,000,000 to 1, he said. Hundreds of observers saw the flame that night, and the night after about midnight, and again the night after, or so for 10 nights. A flame each night. Why the shots ceased after the 10th, no one on Earth has attempted to explain. Maybe the gases of firing caused the Martians an inconvenience. Dense clouds of smoke or dust visible through a powerful telescope on Earth, as little gray, fluctuating patches spread through the cleariness of the planet's atmosphere and obscured its more familiar features. Even the daily papers woke up to the disturbance at last. The popular notes appeared here, there, and everywhere concerning the volcanoes upon Mars. The Socramic periodical Punch, I remember, made a happy use of it in the political cartoon. And all suspected these missiles the Martians had fired at us drew earthward, rushing now at a pace of many miles a second through the empty gulf of space, hour by hour, and day by day, nearer and nearer. It seems to me now almost incredibly wonderful that, with the swift fate hanging over us, men could go about their pretty concerns as they did. I remember how jubilant Markham was at securing a new photograph of the planet for the illustrated paper he edited in those days. People in these later times scarcely realized the abundance and enterprise of our 19th century papers. For my own part, I was much occupied in learning to ride the bicycle, and busy upon reading a series of papers discussing the probable developments of moral ideas as civilization progressed. One night, the firing missile then could scarcely have been 10 million miles away. I went for a walk with my wife. It was starlight, and I explained the signs of the zodiac to her, and pointed out Mars, a bright dot of light creeping zenithward, towards which so many telescopes were pointed. It was a warm night. Coming home, a party of excursionists from Chertsey or Isleworth passed us singing and playing music. There were lights in the upper windows of the house as the people went to bed. From the railway station in the distance came the sound of shunting trains, ringing and rumbling, softened almost into melody by the distance. My wife pointed out to me the brightness of the red, green, and yellow signal lights hanging in framework against the sky. It seemed so safe and tranquil. And that's chapter 1. Bro, are you being Have? Alright, let's see. Pookie. And have the surgery team come out to meet me. Good. Good, I'm glad to hear, Pookie. I'm really glad to hear that. Everything looking okay on my end? Wow, I lost a follower as a result of that. That's just too bad. Hey, yes, I'm just typing up chat. Hey, no worries, girl. No worries. It's something new, so I'm fully expecting a little bit of a change. Alright. Chapter 2. The Falling Star. Surprised that I was even conscious. Yeah. Would it be 2? To what? Just today, just within the stream. Bro, but you know what? Here's the thing. They're gonna come and go anyway. I'm still gonna do what I want to do. Always. But it is what it is. Good morning, Grim. Exactly. We don't talk about trash once it's in the bin. Can't make everyone happy. Exactly. Exactly. Alrighty. And slay, yes, queens and kings and everything wonderfully in between. All right. Violence over the past 2 weeks. Hold. Yeah, that would do it, Pookie. That would do it. And take care of yourself, okay? Don't make me come over there. Alrighty. Chapter 2. The Falling Star. I've gotta go. No worries, Pookie. No worries. Thank you for lurking. Then came the night of the first falling star. It was seen in the early morning, rushing over Winchester eastward, a line of flame high in the atmosphere. Hundreds must have seen it and take it for an ordinary falling star. Albin described it as... Don't look at this person. Bro? Are you misbehaving? Made me come over there. Are you bothering people in this chat? Interesting. Can you say... I don't see why not. Uppercut Ethan Boxer? Alpero, welcome on in. That's so weird. First you come in and then ask me to say something random? Interesting. Keeping an eye on you. Yeah, I would agree, Dave. I would agree. Hey, yo! Tiger, thank you very much for the sub. I appreciate you. And behaving. Good. Good. Goodbye, ads. Well, I appreciate it regardless. Either way. Alrighty. I'm gonna go right into it, so if I don't hear you guys, if I don't see your responses, I apologize. It was seen in the morning, rushing over the Winchester eastward, a line of flame high in the atmosphere. Hundreds must have seen it and taken it for ordinary falling star. Albion described it as leaving a greenish streak behind it that glowed for some seconds. Denning, our greatest authority on meteorites, stated that the height of its first appearance was about 90 or 100 miles. It seemed to him that it fell to the earth about 100 miles east of him. Good morning, Pixie. I was at home at the hour and writing in my study, although my French windows faced towards Ottershaw, and the blind was up, for I loved in those days to look up at the night sky. I saw nothing of it. Yet the strangest of all things that ever came to Earth from outer space must have fallen while I was sitting there. Visible to me had I only looked up as it passed. Some of those who saw its flight say it traveled with a hissing sound. I heard nothing of that. Many people in Berkshire, Surrey, and Middlesex must have seen the fall of it, and at most have thought that another meteorite has descended. No one seems to have troubled to look for the fallen mass that night, but very early in the morning, poor Ogilvy had seen the shooting star, and who was persuaded that a meteorite lay somewhere on the common between Horshile, Ottershaw, and Working, rose early with the idea of finding it. Find it he did, soon after dawn, and not far from the sand pits. An enormous hole that had been made by the impact of the projectile, and the sand and the gravel had been flung violently in every direction over the heath, forming heaps visible a mile and a half away. The heather was on fire eastward, and a thin blue smoke rose against the dawn. The thing itself lay almost entirely buried in sand. Amidst the scattered splinters of a fir tree, it shivered to fragments in its descent. The uncovered part had the appearance of a huge cylinder, caked over and its outlines softened by a thick, scaly, and dun-colored incrustation. It had a diameter of about 30 yards. He approached the mass, surprised at the size and more so at the shape, since most meteorites are rounded more or less completely. It was, however, still so hot from its flight throughout the air as to forbid his near approach. A stirring noise within its cylinder he ascribed to the unequal cooling of its surface, for at the time it had not occurred to him that it might be hollow. Thank you, Crow, for the hydrate. He remained standing at the edge of the pit that the thing had made for itself, staring at its strange appearance, astonished chiefly at its unusual shape and color, and dimly perceiving, even then, some evidence of design in its arrival. The early morning was wonderful still, and the sun just clearing the pine trees towards Weybridge was already warm. He did not remember hearing any birds that morning. There was certainly no breeze stirring, and the only sounds were the faint movements from within this cindery cylinder. What? Cindery is a word? He was all alone on the common. Then, suddenly, he noticed with a start that some of the gray clinker, the ashy incrustation that covered the meteorite, was falling off the circular edge of the end. It was dropping off in flakes and raining down upon the sand. A large piece suddenly came off and fell with a sharp noise that brought his heart into his mouth. For a minute he scarcely realized what this meant, and although the heat was excessive, he clambered down into the pit, close to the bulk, to see the thing more clearly. He fancied even then that the cooling of the body might account for this, but what disturbed that idea was the fact that the ash was falling only from the end of the cylinder. And then he perceived that, very slowly, the circular top of the cylinder was rotating on its body. It was such a gradual movement that he discovered only through noticing that a black mark that had been near him 5 minutes ago was now on the other side of the circumference. Even then he scarcely understood what this indicated, until he heard a muffled grating sound and saw the black mark jerk forward an inch or so. And then the thing came upon him in a flash. The cylinder was artificial, hollow, with the end screwed out. With the end screwed out, something within the cylinder was unscrewing the top. Yo, Original T-Dog, thank you very much for the 200 biddies. I appreciate you. Good morning. Good heavens, said Ogilvy. There's a man in it. Half roasted to death, trying to escape. At once, with a quick mental leap, he linked the thing with the flash upon Mars. At the thought of the confined creature was so dreadful to him that he forgot the heat and went forward to the cylinder to help turn. But luckily, the dull radiation arrested him before he could burn his hands on the still glowing metal. At that he stood irresolute for a moment, and then turned, scrambled out of the pit, and set off running wildly into Woking. Pretty sure they meant working, but that's okay. Time then must have been somewhere about 6 o'clock. Welcome back, Wheel. He met a wagoner and tried to make him understand, but the tale he told and his appearance were so wild his hat had fallen off into the pit, that the man simply drove on. He was equally unsuccessful with the potman who was just unlocking the doors of the public house by Horsell Bridge. Lurk, thank you for lurking. I appreciate you, Crow. The fellow thought he was a lunatic at large and made an unsuccessful attempt to shut him into the tap room. That sobered him a little, and when he saw Henderson, the London journalist, in his garden, he called over the palings and made himself understood. Henderson, he called. You saw that shooting star last night? Well, said Henderson. It's out on Horshall Common now. Good Lord, said Henderson. Fallen meteorite, that's good. But it's something more than a meteorite. It's a cylinder. An artificial cylinder, man. And there's something inside. Henderson stood up with the spade in his hand. "What's that?" he said. He was deaf in one ear. Ogilvy told him all that he had seen. Henderson was a minute or so taking it in. Then he dropped his spade, snatched up his jacket, and came out onto the road. The two men hurried back at once to the common and found the cylinder still lying in the same position. And now the sounds inside had ceased, and the thin circle of bright metal showed between the top and the body of the cylinder. Air was either entering or escaping at the rim with the thin, sizzling sound. They listened, rapped on the scaly burnt metal with a stick, and meeting with no response, they both concluded the man or men inside must be insensible or dead. Of course, the two were quite unable to do anything. They shouted consolation and promises and went off back to the town again to get help. One can imagine them, covered with sand, excited and disordered, running up the little street in the bright sunlight just as the shop folks were taking down their shutters and people were opening their bedroom windows. Henderson went into the railway station at once in order to telegraph the news to London. The newspaper articles had prepared men's minds for the reception of the idea. By 8 o'clock, a number of boys and unemployed men had already started for the common to see Dead Man from Mars. That was the form the story took. I heard of it first from my newspaper boy about 9:15 when I went out to get my daily chronicle. I was naturally startled and lost no time in going out and across the Ottershaw Bridge to the sandpits. Well, thank you for following there, Skyzen. Welcome on in. And that was chapter 2. Well, look at that. Oh, man. So, shall we keep going? This is actually even really interesting. Oh, Chewy, thank you. I appreciate you. All right. Let's keep going. Chapter 3 on Horsesell Common. Found a little crowd of perhaps 20 people surrounding the huge hole in which the cylinder lay. I've already described the appearance of the colossal bulk embedded in the ground. The turf and gravel about it seemed charred as if by a sudden explosion. Yo, Notwood, thank you very much. Keep up the good work, Woot. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hopefully you've been doing well, Notwood. I appreciate you. We have Twitch, baby. We do. Indeed, we do. Thank you, Grim. I appreciate you, too. You're the best mods. I really do. Alright. The turf and gravel about it seemed charged as if by a sudden explosion. No doubt its impact had caused a flash of fire. Henderson and Ogilvy were not there. I think they perceived that nothing was to be done for the present, and had gone away to breakfast at Henderson's house. Breakfast sounds really good right now. There were 4 or 5 boys sitting on the edge of the pit, with their feet dangling and amusing themselves until I stopped them by throwing stones at the giant mass. After I had spoken to them about it, they began playing at touch in and out of the group of bystanders. Among these were a couple of cyclists, a jobbing gardener I employed sometimes, a girl carrying a baby, Greg the butcher and his little boy, and 2 or 3 loafers and golf caddies who were accustomed to hang out by the railway station. There was very little talking. Few of the common people in England had anything but the vaguest astronomical ideas in those days. Most of them were staring quietly at the big table-like end of the cylinder, which was still as Ogilvy and Henderson had left it. I fancy the popular expectation of a heap of charred corpses was disappointed at this inanimate bulk. Some went away while I was there, and other people came. I clambered into the pit and fancied I heard a faint movement under my feet. The top had certainly ceased to rotate. It was only when I got thus close to it that the strangeness of this object was at all evident to me. At the first glance, it was really no more exciting than an overturned carriage or a tree blown across the road. Not so much so, indeed. It was like a rusty gas afloat. Rusty gas float. It required a certain amount of scientific education to perceive that the gray scale of the thing was no common oxide, that the yellowish-white metal that gleamed in the crack between the lid and the cylinder had an unfamiliar hue. Extraterrestrial had no meaning for the most of the onlookers. At the time, it was quite clear in my own mind that the thing had come from the planet Mars, but I judged it improbable that it contained any living creature. I thought the unscrewing might be automatic. In spite of Ogilvy, I still believed that there were men in Mars. My mind ran fancifully on the possibilities of its containing manuscript, on the difficulties in translation that might arise, whether we should find coins and models in it, and so forth. Yet it was too large for assurance on this idea. I felt an impatience to see it opened. About 11, as nothing seemed happening, I walked back, full of such thought, to my home in Maybury, but I found it difficult to work upon my abstract investigations. In the afternoon, the appearance of the common had altered very much. The early editions of the evening papers had startled London with enormous headlines. A message received from Mars, remarkable story from Woking, and so forth. In addition, Ogilvy's wire to the Astronomical Exchange had roused every observatory in the Three Kingdoms. There were half a dozen flies, or more from the Woking station, standing in the road by the sandpits, a basket chassis from Chobham, and a rather lordly carriage. Besides that, there was quite a heap of bicycles. In addition, a large number of people must have walked, in spite of the heat of the day, from Woking and Chertsey, so that there was altogether quite a considerable crowd, one or two gaily dressed ladies among the others. It was glaringly hot, not a cloud in the sky, nor a breath of wind, and the only shadow was that of the few scattered pine trees. Burning heather had been exchanged. The level ground towards Ottershaw was blackened as far as one could see, and still giving off vertical streamers of smoke. An enterprising, sweet-stuff dealer in the Cobham Road sent up his son with a barrow load of green apples and ginger beer. Going to the edge of the pit, I found it occupied by a group of half a dozen men, Henderson, Ogilvy, and a tall, fair-haired man that I afterwards learned was Stent, astronomer royal, with several working men wielding spades and pickaxes. Stent was giving directions in a clear, high-pitched voice. He was standing on the cylinder, which was now evidently much cooler. His face was crimson and streaming with perspiration, and something seemed to have irritated him. A large portion of the cylinder had been uncovered, though its lower end was still embedded. As soon as Ogilvy saw me among the staring crowd on the edge of the pit, he called to me to come down, asked me if I would mind going over to see Lord Hilton, the lord of the manor. The growing crowd, he said, was becoming a serious impediment to their excavations, especially the boys. They wanted a light railing put up and help to keep people back. He told me that a faint stirring was occasionally still audible within the case, but that the workmen had failed to unscrew the top, as it afforded no grip to them. The case appeared to be enormously thick, and it was possible that the faint sounds we heard represented a noisy tumult in the interior. I was very glad to do as he asked, and so become one of the privileged spectators within the contemplated enclosure. I failed to find Lord Hilton at this house, but I was told he was expected from London by the 6 o'clock train from Waterloo. And it was then that about 5:15 I went home, had some tea, and walked up to the station to waylay him. That was chapter 3. Pineapple fam, thank you very much for the follow. Welcome on in. Oh, okay. How are you guys doing in chat so far? Personally, I'm actually having a lot of fun. I'm really invested in the story. Also, shout out to Blue Tiger for the recommendation. This was a really good one to start with, I think. Alrighty. I suppose we can keep going. Okay. When I returned to the common, the sun was setting. Scattered groups were hurrying from the direction of Woking, and 1 or 2 persons were returning. The crowd about the pit had increased and stood out black against the yellow, lemon yellow of the sky. A couple hundred people, perhaps. There were raised voices, and some sort of struggle appeared to be going on about the pit. Oh. Looks like there is an ad. I will pause for a second. Don't want you guys to miss anything. So, what now? I suppose. But I think the ad should be just about done now. So I think let's keep going. Okay. Alrighty. Let's see, where did I go? Okay. There were raised voices, and some sort of struggle appeared to be going on about the pit. Strange imaginings passed through my mind. As I drew near, I heard Stent's voice. Keep back, keep back. A boy came running towards me. It's a movin', he said to me as he passed. A screwin' and a screwin' out. I don't like it. I'm going home, I am. I went on to the crowd. There were really, I should think, 200 or 300 people elbowing and jostling one another, the 1 or 2 ladies there being by no means the least active. He's fallen in the pit, cried someone. Keep back, said several. The crowd swayed a little, and I elbowed my way through. Everyone seemed greatly excited. I heard a peculiar humming sound from the pit. I say, said Ogilvy, help keep these idiots back. We don't know what's in the confounding thing, you know? Confounded thing, you know? T-Dog, as long as it's within public domain, I would love that. But I do have to let you know, this book has over... Oh, actually, we're going a lot faster through this than I thought. To me, on my Kindle, it says over 2,000 pages, but we're already at 242. Interesting. But yeah, as long as it's in public domain, I have no problem doing this again. Not at all. I like the idea, actually, T-Dog. Yes, they're older books. Perfect. Okay, then absolutely. I'll write down that recommendation really quick. Lovecraft. Alrighty. Okay. I say, Ogilvy, help keep these idiots back. We don't know what's in the confounding thing, you know? I saw a young man, a shop assistant in Woking, I believe he was, standing on the cylinder and trying to scramble out of the hole again. The crowd had pushed him in. The end of the cylinder was being screwed out from within. Nearly 2 feet of shining screw projected. Is it? Okay. I might have to do that then. Thank you for the recommendation, T-Dog. I appreciate it. The end of the cylinder was being screwed out from within, nearly 2 feet of shining screw projected. Somebody blundered against me, and I narrowly missed being pitched onto the top of the screw. I turned, and as I did, so the screw must have come out. For the lid of the cylinder fell upon the gravel with a ringing concussion. I stuck my elbow into the person behind me and turned my head towards the thing again. For a moment, that circular cavity seemed perfectly black. I had the sunset in my eyes. I think everyone expected to see a man emerge, possibly something a little unlike us terrestrial men, but in all essentials, a man. I know I did, but looking, I presently saw something stirring within the shadow, grayish, billowy movements, one above another, and 2 luminous, disc-like eyes. Then something resembling a little gray snake, about the thickness of a walking stick, coiled up out of the writhing metal, and wriggled in the air towards me, and then another. A sudden chill came over me. There was a loud shriek from a woman behind. I half turned, keeping my eyes fixed upon the cylinder still, from which other tentacles were now projecting, and began pushing my way back from the edge of the pit. I saw astonishment giving place to a horror on the faces of the people around me. I heard inarticulate exclamations on all sides. There was a general movement backwards. I saw the shopman struggling still on the edge of the pit. I found myself alone, and saw the people on the other side of the pit running off, stunned among them. I looked again at the cylinder. An ungovernable terror gripped me. I stood petrified and staring. A big grayish rounded bulk, the size perhaps of a bear, was rising slowly and painfully out of the cylinder. As it bulged up and caught the light, it glistened like wet leather. Hi, Sandy. Happy Sunday. How are you doing? Hopefully you're doing well. 2 large, dark-colored eyes were regarding me steadfastly. The mask that framed them, the head of the thing, was rounded. Thank you, Grim. I book while I drink my coffee. I know, there's something just not quite like that, T-Dog. It just feels so good. Getting ready for spoops? Ooh, Sandy. I hope you have a great time. I'll try to pop in. And thank you, Grim, for the shout-out. For giving Sandy the shout-out. Alright. Let's get back into it. A big grayish rounded bulk, the size perhaps of a bear, was rising slowly and painfully out of the cylinder. As it bulged up and caught the light, it glistened like wet leather. 2 large, dark-colored eyes were regarding me steadfastly. The mask that framed them, the head of the thing, was rounded, and had, one might say, face. There was a mouth under the eyes, the lipless brim of which quivered and panted, and dropped saliva. The whole creature heaved and pulsated convulsively. A lank, tentacular appendage gripped the edge of the cylinder, another swayed in the air. Those who have never seen a living Martian can scarcely imagine the strange horror of its appearance. The peculiar V-shaped mouth with its pointed upper lip, the absence of brow ridges, the absence of a chin beneath the wedge-like lower lip, the incessant quivering of its mouth, the gorgon groups of tentacles, the tumultuous breathing of the lungs in a strange atmosphere, the evident heaviness and painfulness of movement due to the greater gravitational energy of the earth above all, the extraordinary intensity of the immense eyes were at once vital, intense, inhuman, crippled, and monstrous. There was something fungoid in the oily brown skin, something in the clumsy deliberation of the tedious movements unspeakably nasty. Even at the first encounter, this first glimpse, I was overcome with disgust and dread. Suddenly, the monster vanished. It had toppled over the brim of the cylinder and fallen into the pit, with a thud like the fall of a great mass of leather. I heard it give a peculiar thick cry, and forthwith another one of these creatures appeared darkly in the deep shadow of the aperture. I turned, and running madly, made for the first group of trees 100 yards away, but I ran slantingly and stumbling, for I could not avert my face from these things. There, among some young pine trees and furze bushes, I stopped, panting, waited further developments. The common round the sand pits was dotted with people, standing like myself, in a half-fascinated terror, staring at these creatures, or rather at the heaped gravel at the edge of the pit in which they lay. And then, with a renewed horror, I saw a round black object bobbing up and down on the edge of the pit. It was the head of a shopman who had fallen in, but showing as little black object against the hot western sun. Now he got a shoulder and knee up, and again he seemed to slick back until only his head was visible. Suddenly, he vanished, and I could have fancied a fake shriek had reached me. I had a momentary impulse to go back and help him that my fears overruled. Everything was then quite invisible, hidden by the deep pit and the heap of sand, and that the fall of the cylinder had made. Anyone coming along the road from Chobham or Woking would have been amazed at the sight. A dwindling multitude of perhaps 100 people or more standing in a great irregular circle, in ditches, behind bushes, behind gates and hedges, saying little to one another that in short, excited shouts and staring hard at the few heaps of sand. The barrow of ginger beer stood, a queer derelict, black against the burning sky, and in the sand pits was a row of deserted vehicles with their horses feeding out of nosebags or punting the ground. And that was chapter 4. Thank you for redeeming that, Crow. How are you guys doing? Hopefully you're doing well. Suppose we should keep going, huh?
Hi!
Hola, they finished with me now. Oh, I'm so glad to hear. Going to lay down, rest my eyes a bit. Thank you for lurking, Chewy. Hopefully you get some good rest. Okay. Chapter 5. The Heat Ray. After the glimpse I had of the Martians emerging from the cylinder in which they had come to the Earth from their planet, a kind of fascination paralyzed my actions. Oh, that would do it, Pookie. Oh. Please take it easy, and I hope you have a smooth recovery. Thank you for lurking, Doom. I appreciate you. I was a battleground of fear and curiosity. I did not dare go back towards the pit, but I felt... Thank you for lurking, Pookie. But I felt a passionate longing to peer into it. I began walking, therefore, in a big curve, seeking some point of vantage and continually looking at the sand heaps. There is a lurk. Indeed. Thank you for lurking, Crow. Ooh, 3 in a row. I feel like you guys are hopefully enjoying this, and that's okay. Alright. Continually looking at sand heaps that hid these newcomers to our Earth. Once a leash of thin black whips, like the arms of an octopus, flashed across the sunset and was immediately withdrawn, and afterwards a thin rod rose up, joint by joint, bearing at its apex a circular disc that spun with a wobbling motion. What could be going on there? Most of the spectators had gathered in 1 or 2 groups, one a little crowd towards Woking, the other a knot of people in the direction of Chobham. Evidently, they shared my mental conflict. There were few near me. One man I approached. He was, I perceived, a neighbor of mine, though I did not know his name. Nap time, I think. I hope you have a good sleep, Crow. And I accosted. But it was scarcely a time for articulate conversation. Thank you for the hydrate, Crow. What ugly brutes, he said. Good God, what ugly brutes. He repeated this over and over again. Did you see a man in the pit? I said, but he made no answer to that. We became silent and stood watching for a time side by side, deriving, I fancy, a certain comfort in one another's company. Then I shifted my position to a little knoll that gave me the advantage of a yard or more of elevation, and when I looked for him presently, he walked towards Woking. The sunset faded to twilight before anything further happened. The crowd far away on the left towards Woking seemed to grow, and I heard now a faint murmur from it. The little knot of people towards Chopin dispersed. There was scarcely an intimation of movement from the pit. It was this, as much as anything, that gave people courage, and I suppose the new arrivals from Woking also helped to restore its confidence. At any rate, as the dusk came on, a slow, intermittent movement upon the sand pits began, a movement that seemed to gather force as the stillness of the evening about the cylinder remained unbroken. Vertical black figures in twos and threes would advance, stop, watch, and advance again, spreading as they did so in a thin, irregular crescent that promised to enclose the pit in its attenuated horns. I, too, on my side, began to move towards the pit. Then I saw some cabmen, and others had walked boldly into the sandpits, and I heard the clatter of hoofs and the grat of wheels. I saw a lad trundling off the barrow of apples, and then, within 30 yards of the pit, advancing from the direction of Horsell, I noted a little black knot of men, the foremost of whom was waving a white flag. This was the deputation. There had been plenty of hasty consultation, and since the Martians were evidently, in spite of their repulsive forms, intelligent creatures, it had been resolved to show them, by approaching them with signals, that we too were intelligent. Flutter, flutter, went the flag, first to the right, and then to the left. It was too far for me to recognize anyone there, but afterwards I learned that Ogilvy, Stent, and Henderson were with others in this attempt at communication. This little group had in its advance dragged inward, so to speak, in the circumference of the now almost complete circle of people, and a number of dim black figures followed at its discreet distances. Suddenly, there was a flash of light, and the quantity of luminous greenish smoke came out of the pit in 3 distinct puffs, which drove up, one after another, straight into the still air. This smoke, or flame, perhaps, would be the better word for it, was so bright that the deep blue sky overhead and the hazy stretches of brown common towards Chertsey, set with black pine trees, seemed to darken abruptly as these puffs arose, and to remain the darker after their dispersal. At the same time, a faint hissing sound became audible. Beyond the pit stood the little wedge of people, with the white flag at its apex, arrested by these phenomena, a little knot of small vertical black shapes upon the black ground. As the green smoke arose, their faces flashed out pallid green, and faded again as it vanished, and slowly the hissing passed into a humming, into a long, loud, droning noise. Slowly, a humped shape arose out of the pit, and the ghost of a beam of light seemed to flicker out from it. Forthwith, flashes of actual flame, a bright glare leaping from one to another, sprang from the scattered group of men. It was as if some invisible jet impinged upon them and flashed into white flame. It was as if each man were suddenly and momentarily turned to fire. In the light of their own destruction, I saw them staggering and falling, and their supporters turning to run. I stood staring, not as yet realizing that this was death leaping from man to man into that little distant crowd. All I felt was that it was something very strange, an almost noiseless and blinding flash of light, and a man fell headlong and lay still. As the unseen shaft of heat passed over them, pine trees burst into fire, and every dry furze brush became with one dull thud of a mass of flames. In a far away towards Knaphill, I saw the flashes of trees and hedges and wooden buildings suddenly set alight. It was sweeping around swiftly and steadily, this flaming death, this invisible, inevitable sword of heat. I perceived it coming towards me by the flashing bushes it touched, and was too astounded and stupefied to stir. I heard the crackle of fire in the sandpits and the sudden squeal of a horse that was as suddenly stilled. Then it was as if invisible, yet intensely heated, finger were drawn through the heather between me and the Martians, and all along the curving line between the sandpits, the dark ground smoked and crackled. Something fell with a crash far away to the left, where the road from Woking stations opened out on the common. Forthwith, the hissing and humming ceased, and the black dome-like object sank slowly out of sight into the pit. Hi, Jer. Good morning. All right, looks like we had an ad, so I'll wait about a few seconds or so. Good morning, Jer. How are you doing? I'll be here while I grab breakfast. No worries, Jer. Good. I'm glad to hear. Hopefully you enjoy your breakfast. All right. I think we're okay to get back into it. All of this happened with such swiftness that I had stood motionless, dumbfounded, and dazzled by the flashes of light. Had that death swept through a full circle, it must inevitably have slain me in my surprise. But it passed and spared me, and left the night about me suddenly dark and unfamiliar. The undulating common seemed now dark almost to blackness, except where its roadways lay gray and pale under the deep blue sky of the early night. It was dark and suddenly void of men. Overhead, the stars were mustering, and in the west the sky was still a pale bright, almost greenish blue. Tops of the pine trees and the roofs Hello, I'm back. Toxic Chalk, thank you for the follow. Welcome on in. Alrighty. Either way, Toxic, I hope you're doing well. Hopefully it's okay if I call you that. Either way, let me know. Okay. Let's go right into it. Chapter 6. The Heat Ray and the Chopin Road. It is still a matter of wonder how the Martians are able to slay... Oops, hold on. The following book is rated for followers' viewer discretion is advised. What? Excuse me, Crow. Okay. PG. Yeah, just in case. Like, sometimes chat can be a little bit spicy, so I usually keep 18 plus up there for that reason. Hope that makes sense. Okay. It's still a matter of wonder how the Martians are able to slay men so swiftly and so silently. Many think that in some way they are able to generate an intense heat in a chamber of practically absolute non-conductivity. Oh, I know, Crow. I know you are. This intense heat they project in a parallel beam against any object they choose by means of a polished parabolic mirror of unknown composition, much as the parabolic mirror of a lighthouse projects a beam of light. But no one has absolutely proved these details. However it is done, it is certain that a beam of heat is the essence of the matter. Heat and invisible instead of visible light. Whatever is combustible flashes into flame at its touch. Lead runs like water. Lead runs like water. It softens iron, cracks, and melts glass. And when it falls upon water, incontinently, oh my gosh, I apologize, that explodes into steam. That night, nearly 40 people lay under the starlight about the pit, charred and distorted beyond recognition, and all night long the common from Horsell to Maybury was deserted and brightly ablaze. The news of the massacre probably reached Chobham, Woking, and Ottershaw about the same time. In Woking, the shops had closed when the tragedy happened, and a number of people, shop people and so forth, attracted by the stories they had heard, were walking over to the Horshall Bridge and along the road between the hedges that runs out at last upon the common. You may imagine the young people brushed up after the labors of the day, making this novelty, as they would make any novelty, the excuse for walking together and enjoying a trivial flirtation. You may figure to yourself the hum of voices along the road in the gloaming. As yet, of course, few people in Woking even knew the cylinder had opened, though poor Henderson had sent a messenger on a bicycle to the post office with a special wire to an evening paper. As these folks came out by twos and threes upon the open, they found little knots of people. I might go, Rain. I feel incredibly awful. No worries, Pookie. You take care of yourself, okay? Just rest. They found little knots of people. Bye-bye, have a good stream. Thank you. Thank you for coming in. And then, okay. Looking excitedly and peering at the spinning mirror over the sandpits. The newcomers were, no doubt, soon infected by the excitement of the occasion. By 8:30, when the deputation was destroyed, there may have been a crowd of 300 people or more at this place. Besides, those who had left the road to approach the Martians nearer. There were 3 policemen too, one of whom was mounted, doing their best, under instructions from Stent, to keep people back and deter them from approaching the cylinder. There was some booing from those more thoughtless and excitable souls, to whom a crowd is always an occasion for noise and horseplay. Stent and Ogilvy, anticipating some possibilities of a collision, had telegraphed from Horshall to the barracks as soon as the Martians emerged, for the help of a company of soldiers to protect these strange creatures from violence. After that, they returned to lead
that ill-fated advance. The description of their death, as it was seen by the crowd, tallies very closely with my own impressions. 3 puffs of green smoke, the deep humming note, and the flashes of the flame. But the crowd of people had a far narrower escape than mine. Only the fact that a hummock of heathery sand intercepted the lower part of the heat ray had saved them. Had the elevation of the parabolic mirror had been a few yards higher, none could have lived to tell the tale. They saw the flashes, and the men falling, and an invisible hand, as it were, lit the bushes as it hurried towards them through the twilight. Then, with the whistling note that rose above the droning of the pit, the beam swung close over their heads, the lights lighting the tops of the beech trees that lined the road, and splitting the bricks, smashing the windows, firing the window frames, and bringing down in crumbling ruin a portion of the gable of the house near the corner. In the sudden thud, hiss, and the glare of igniting trees, the panic-stricken crowd seems to have swayed hesitatingly for some moments. Sparks and burning twigs began to fall into the road, and single leaves like puffs of flame. Hats and dresses caught fire. Then came a crying from the common. There were shrieks and shouts, and suddenly a mounted policeman came galloping through the confusion with his hands clasped over his head, screaming, "They're coming!" A woman shrieked, and incontinently everyone was turning and pushing at those behind in order to clear their way to Woking again. They must have bolted as blindly as a flock of sheep. Where the road grows narrow and black between the high banks, the crowd jammed and desperate struggle occurred. All the crowd did not escape. 3 persons at least, 2 women and a little boy, were crushed and trampled there and left to die amid the terror and the darkness. Wow, that was a bit intense. That was chapter 6. I think I'm okay to keep going for chapter 7. Okay. Enjoy stream. I gotta hop off. Thanks for the stream. I got a visitor at the bed. No worries, Wheel. Thank you for coming in. I appreciate it. And I hope you have a good time with your visitor. Alrighty. Second. One second. Okay. Alrighty. Shall we keep going? Let's keep going. Alright. Chapter 7. How I Reached Home. For my own part, I remember nothing of my flight except the stress of blundering against trees and stumbling through the heather. All about me gathered the invisible terrors of the Martians. That pitiless sword of heat seemed whirling to and fro, flourishing overhead before it descended and smote me out of life. I didn't do it. Bro, are you up to something? Bro? Don't be suspicious now. Don't be a little sussy baka, okay? ADHD and coffee. Hey, you're good. You're good. I'm going to turn your VOD into a book on tape. Ah! I mean, it's my first time doing it, so I really appreciate that, T-Dog. I mean, just the idea of it, but I'll save the VOD and I'll upload it to YouTube if I can. I don't know if I can do that actually, but I appreciate that, even if it's for shits and giggles. Okay. Oh my god, where did I leave off? Alright. I came into the road between the crossroads and Horshell and ran along this to the crossroads. At last, I could go no further. I was exhausted with the violence of my emotion and of my flight, and I staggered and fell by the wayside. That was near the bridge that crosses the canal by the gas works. I fell and lay still. I must have remained there for some time, and I sat up, strangely perplexed. For a moment, perhaps, I could not clearly understand how I came there. My hair had fallen from me like a garment. My hat had gone, and my collar had burst away from its fastener. A few moments before, there had been only 3 real things before me: the immensity of the night and space and nature, my own feebleness and anguish, and the near approach of death. Now it was as if something turned over, and the point of view altered abruptly. There was no sensible transition from one state of mind to the other. I was immediately the self of every day again, a decent, ordinary citizen. The silent common, the impulse of my flight, the starting flames, or as if they had been in a dream. I asked myself, had these latter things indeed happened? I could not credit it. I rose and walked unsteadily up the steep incline of the bridge. My mind was blank wonder. My muscles and nerves seemed drained of their strength. I dare say I staggered drunkenly. A head rose over the arch, and the figure of a workman carrying a basket appeared. Beside him ran a little boy. He passed me, wishing me a good night. I was minded to speak to him, but did not. I answered his greeting with a meaningless mumble and went over the bridge. Over the Mayberry Arch, a train, a billowing tumult of white firelit smoke, and a long caterpillar of lighted windows went flying south, clatter, clatter, clap, rap, and it had gone. A dim group of people talked in the gate of one of those houses, in the pretty little row of gables that was called the Oriental Terrace. It was all so real and so familiar, and that behind me, it was frantic, fantastic, such things I told myself could not be. Perhaps I am a man of exceptional moods. I do not know how far my experience is common. At times I suffer from the strangest sense of detachment from myself and the world around me. I seem to watch it all from the outside, from somewhere inconceivably remote, out of time, out of space, out of the stress and tragedy of it all. This feeling was very strong upon me that night. Here was another side to my dream. But the trouble was the blank incongruity of the serenity and the swift death lying yonder, not 2 miles away. There was a noise of business from the gasworks, and the electric lamps were all alight. I stopped at the group of people. "What's news from the common?" said I. There were 2 men and a woman at the gate. "Eh?" said one of the men, turning. "What's the news from the common?" "Ain't you just been there?" asked the man. "People seem fairly silly about the common," said the woman over the gate. "What's it all about?" "Haven't you heard of the men from Mars?" said I. "The creatures from Mars?" "Quite enough," said the woman over the gate. "Thanks." And all 3 of them laughed. I felt foolish and angry. I tried and I found I could not tell them what I had seen. They laughed again at my broken sentences. "You'll hear more yet," I said, and went to my home. I startled my wife at the doorway, so haggard was I. I went into the dining room, sat down, drank some wine, and so soon as I could collect myself sufficiently, I told her the things I had seen. The dinner, which was a cold one, had already been served, and remained neglected on the table while I told my story. "There is one thing," I said, to allay the fears I had aroused. "They are the most sluggish things I ever saw crawl. They may keep the pit and kill people who come near them, but they cannot get out of it. But the horror of them—" "Don't, dear," said my wife, knitting her brows, putting her hand on mine. "Poor Ogilvy, to think he may be lying dead there," said I. Well, that's okay. That's okay. All right, it looks like there's going to be an ad, so I'll wait a few seconds. Thank you for this stretch, Crow. Break ends in posture check. Thank you, Crow. I appreciate you. I really do. All right. Hmm. My wife, at least, did not find my experience incredible. When I saw how deadly white her face was, I ceased abruptly. They may come here, she said again and again. I pressed her to take wine and tried to reassure her. They can scarcely move, I said. I began to comfort her and myself by repeating all that Ogilvy had told me of the impossibility of the Martians establishing themselves on the Earth. In particular, I laid stress on the gravitational difficulty. On the surface of the Earth, the force of gravity is 3 times what it is on the surface of Mars. A Martian, therefore, would weigh 3 times more than on Mars, albeit his muscular strength would be the same. His own body would be a cope of lead to him. That indeed was the general opinion. Both the Times and the Daily Telegraph, for instance, insisted on it the next morning, and both overlooked, just as I did, two obvious modifying influences. The atmosphere of the Earth, we now know, contains far more oxygen or far less argon, whichever way one likes to put it, than does Mars. The invigorating influences of this excess of oxygen upon the Martians indisputably did much to counterbalance the increased weight of their bodies. And in the second place, we all overlooked the fact that such mechanical intelligences as the Martians possessed quite able to dispense with muscular exertion at a pinch. But I did not consider these points at the time, and so my reasoning was dead against the chances of the invaders. With wine and food, the confidence of my own table, and the necessity of reassuring my wife, I grew by insensible degrees courageous and secure. They have done a foolish thing, said I, fingering my wineglass. They are dangerous because no doubt they are mad with terror. Perhaps they expect to find no living things, certainly no intelligent living things. A shell in the pit, said I. If the worst comes to worst, we'll kill them all. The intense excitement of the events had no doubt left my perceptive powers in a state of erethism. I remember the dinner table with extraordinary vividness even now, my dear wife's sweet anxious face peering at me from under the pink lampshade. Hydrate? Thank you, Sushi. Okay. The white cloth with its silver and glass table furniture. For in those days, even philosophical writers had many little luxuries. The crimson purple wine in my glass are photographically distinct. At the end of it I sat, tempering nuts with a cigarette, regretting Ogilvy's rashness, and denouncing the short-sighted timidity of the Martians. So some respectable dodo in the dodo? Oh my gosh. In the Martuus might have lorded it in his nest, and discussed the arrival of the ship full of pitless sailors in want of animal food. We will peck them to death tomorrow, my dear. I did not know it, but that was the last civilized dinner I was to eat for many strange and terrible days. And that was chapter 7. How are we doing, everyone? Hopefully y'all are doing alright. I think I might go fill up my water really quick. So for now, I'll be like, not even a minute. Just hang out. I'll be right back. Not even a minute, and I'm already back. Okay. Oh, okay. Chapter 8, Friday night. The most extraordinary thing to my mind of all the strange and wonderful things that happened on that Friday was the dovetailing of the commonplace habits of our social order with the first beginnings of the series of events that was to topple that social order headlong. If on Friday night you had taken a pair of compasses and drawn a circle with a radius of 5 miles around the Woking sandpits, I doubt if you would have had one human being outside of it, unless it were some relation of Stent or of the 3 or 4 cyclists or London people lying dead on the common, whose emotions or habits were at all affected by the newcomers. Many people had heard of the cylinder, of course, and talked about it in their leisure, but it certainly did not make the sensation that an ultimatum to Germany would have done. In London, that poor Knight Henderson's telegram describing the gradual unscrewing of the shot was judged to be a canard, and his evening paper, after wiring for authentication from him and receiving no reply, the man was killed, decided not to print the special edition. Even with the 5-mile circle, the great majority of people were inert. I have already described the behavior of the men and women to whom I spoke. All over the district, people were dining and supping, working men were gardening after the labors of the day, children were being put to bed, young people were wandering through the lanes, lovemaking, students sat over their books. Maybe there was a murmur in the village streets, a novel and dominant topic in the public houses, and here and there a messenger, or even an eyewitness of the later occurrences, caused a whirl of excitement, a shouting, and a running to and fro. But for the most part of the daily routine of working, eating, drinking, sleeping, went on as it had done for the Count less years, as though no planet Mars existed in the sky. Even at Woking Station, in Horsham, and Chopin, that was the case. In Woking Junction, until a late hour, trains were stopping and going on. Others were shunting on the sidings. Passengers were lighting and waiting, and everything was proceeding in the most ordinary way. Check something quick. Cool. Alrighty. In Woking Junction, until a late hour, trains were stopping and going on. Others were shunting on the sidings. Passengers were alighting and waiting, and everything was proceeding in the most ordinary way. A boy from the town, trenching on Smith's Monopoly, was selling papers with the afternoon's news. The ringing impacts of trucks and the sharp whistle of the engines from the junction mingled with their shouts, "Men from Mars!" Excited men came into the station about 9 o'clock with incredible tidings, and caused no more disturbance than drunkards might have done. People rattling Londonwards peered into the darkness outside the carriage windows, and only saw a rare flickering, vanishing spark dance from the direction of Horsham, a red glow and a thin veil of smoke driving across the stars, and thought that nothing more serious than a heath fire was happening. It was only around the edge of the common that any disturbance was perceptible. There were half a dozen villas burning on the Woking border. There were lights in all the houses on the common side of the 3 villages, and the people there kept awake till dawn. The crowd lingered restlessly, people coming and going, but the crowd remaining, both on the Chopin and Horsham bridges. 1 or 2 adventurous souls was afterwards found, went into the darkness, and crawled quite near the Martians, but they never returned. For now, again, a light ray, like a beam of a warship's searchlight, swept the common, and the heat ray was ready to follow. Save for such, that big area of common was silent and desolate, and the charred bodies lay about on it all night under the stars, and all the next day. A noise of hammering from the pit was heard by many people. So you have the state of things on Friday night, In the center, sticking into the skin of our old planet Earth like a poison dart, was the cylinder. But the poison was scarcely working yet. Around it was a patch of the silent common, smoldering in places, the few dark, dimly seen objects lying in contorted attitudes here and there. Here and there was a burning bush or a tree. Beyond was a fringe of excitement. Farther than that fringe, the inflammation had not crept as yet. In the rest of the world, the stream of life still flowed as it had flowed for immemorable years. The fever of war that would presently clog vein and artery, deaden nerve, and destroy brain had still to develop. All night long, the Martians were hammering and stirring, sleepless, indefatigable, and work upon the machines they were making ready. And ever and again, a puff of greenish-white smoke whirled up into the starlit sky. About 11, a company of soldiers came through Horschel and deployed along the edge common to form a cordon. Later, a second company marched through Chopam to deploy on the north side of the common. Several officers from the Inkerman barracks had been on the common earlier that day, and one, Major Eden, was reported to be missing. The column of the regiment came to the Chopam Bridge and was busy questioning the crowd at midnight. The military authorities were certainly alive to the seriousness of the business. About 11, the next morning's papers were able to say a squadron of hussars, 2 Maxims, and about 400 men of the Cardigan regiment started from Aldershot. A few seconds after midnight, the crowd in the Chertsey Road, Woking, saw a star fall from the heaven into the pine woods in the northwest. It had a greenish color and caused a silent brightness like summer lightning. This was the second cylinder. Now that's exciting. Okay. So that was chapter 8. Yo, how you doing? I'm doing good. Doing a little bit something a little different. Currently reading a book. Hope you're having a brilliant day. I am, Butch. I am. Hopefully you are having a good day as well. Are you up to anything lately, or how have you been? Alrighty. Shall we continue, or does people want to say thank you for the raid yesterday? Of course, Butch, of course. Pleasure was mine. How did the stream go yesterday? I really appreciate it. Yeah, it went awesome. I am very glad to hear. I'm very glad to hear. Okay, let's continue. Alright, chapter 9. The fighting begins. Saturday lives in my memory as a day of suspense. It was a day of lassitude too, hot and close with, I am told, a rapidly fluctuating barometer. I had slept but little, though my wife had succeeded in sleeping, and I rose early. I went into my garden before breakfast and stood listening, but towards the common there was nothing stirring but a lark. The milkman came as usual, heard the rattle of his chariot, and went around to the side gate to ask the latest news. He told me that during the night the Martians had been surrounded by troops and that guns were expected. Then, a familiar reassuring note I had heard a train running towards Woking. Are you up for Halo later, Rains? Quite possibly. I haven't decided yet. They aren't to be killed, said the milkman, if that can possibly be avoided. I saw my neighbor gardening, chatted with him for a time, and then strolled in to breakfast. It was a most unexceptional morning. My neighbor was of opinion that the troops would be able to capture or to destroy the Martians during the day. It's a pity they make themselves so unapproachable, he said. It would be curious to know how they live on another planet. We might learn a thing or two. He came up to the fence and extended a hand of strawberries, for his gardening was as generous as it was enthusiastic. At the same time, he told me of the burning of the pine woods, about the Byfleet golflinks. They say, he said, that there's another of those blessed things fallen there, number 2. But one's enough, surely. This lot'll cost the insurance people a pretty penny before everything's settled. He laughed with an air of the greatest good humor as he said this. The woods, he said, were still burning, and pointed out a haze of smoke to me. They'll be hot underfoot for days, on account of the thick soil of pine needles and turf, he said, and then grew serious over poor Ogilvy. After breakfast, instead of working, I decided to walk down towards the common. Under the railway bridge, I found a group of soldiers, sappers, I think, men in small round caps, dirty red jackets unbuttoned, and showing their blue shirts, dark trousers, and boots coming to the calf. They told me no one was allowed over the canal, and looking along the road towards the bridge, I saw one of the cardigan men standing sentinel there. I talked with these soldiers for a time. I told them my sight of the Martians on the previous meeting. None of them had seen Martians, and they had the vaguest ideas of them, so that they piled me with questions. They said that they did not know who had authorized the movements of the troops. Their idea was that a dispute had arisen at the Horse Guards. The ordinary sapper is a great deal better educated than the common soldier, and they discussed the peculiar conditions of the possible fight with some acuteness. I described the heat ray to them, and they began to argue among themselves. Crawl up under cover and rush 'em, say I, said one. Get at, said another. What's cover against this? There eat sticks to cook ear. What we got to do is go as near as the ground will let us and then drive a trench. Blow your trenches. You always want trenches. You ought to have been born a rabbit snippy. Ain't they got any necks then? Said a third. Abruptly, a little contemplative, dark man smoking a pipe. I repeated my description. Octopuses, that's what all calls 'em. Talk about fishers of men, fighters of fish. It is this time. Ain't no murder killing beasts like that, said the first speaker. Why not shell the darn things straight off and finish 'em? Said the little dark man. You can't tell what they might do. Where's your shells? Said the first speaker. There ain't no time. Do it in a rush. That's my tip, and do it at once. So they discussed it, and after a while I left them. I went on to the railway station to get as many morning papers as I could. But I will not weary the reader with the description of the long morning and of the long afternoon. I did not succeed in getting a glimpse of the common, for even Horsham and Chopin church towers were in the hands of the military authorities. The soldiers I addressed didn't know anything. The officers were mysterious as well as busy. I found people in the town quite secure again in the presence of the military, and I heard them for the first time from Marshall, the tobacconist, that his son was among the dead on the common. The soldiers had made the people on the outskirts of Horsham lock up and leave their houses. All right. Looks like we got an ad break, so I will wait just a second. How you guys doing? All right. I go back to lunch. About 2, very tired for, as I have said, the day was extremely hot and dull, and in order to refresh myself, I took a cold bath in the afternoon. About 4:30, I went up to the railway station to get an evening paper, for the morning papers had contained only a very inaccurate description of the killing of Stent, Henderson, Ogilvy, and the others. But there was little I didn't know. The Martians didn't show an inch of themselves. They seemed busy in their pit, and there was a sound of hammering and almost contentious streamer of smoke. Apparently, they were getting ready for a struggle. Fresh attempts have made to signal, but without access. And keep the chat PG. It's okay, girl. No worries. You're fine. Fresh attempts have been made to signal, but without success, was the stereotyped formula of the papers. A sapper told me it was done by a man in a ditch with the flag on a long pole. The Martians took as much notice of such advances as we should of the lowing of a cow. I must confess, the sight of all this armament, all this preparation, greatly excited me. My imagination became belligerent and defeated the invaders in a dozen striking ways. Something of my schoolboy dreams of battle and heroism came back. It hardly seemed a fair fight to me at the time. They seemed very helpless in that pit of theirs. About 3 o'clock, there began a thud of a gun at measured intervals from Chertsey or Addlestone. I learned that the smoldering pine wood in which the second cylinder had fallen was being shelled, in the hope of destroying the object before it opened. It was only about 5, however, that a field gun reached Choban for use against the first body of Martians. About 6 in the evening, as I sat at tea with my wife in the summer house talking vigorously about the battle that was lowering upon us, I heard a muffled detonation from the common, and immediately after a gust of firing. Close on the heels of that came a violent rattling crash, quite close to us that shook the ground, and starting out upon the lawn, I saw the tops of trees about the Oriental College burst into smoky red flame, and the tower of the little church beside it slid down into ruin. The pinnacle of the mosque had vanished, and the roof line of the college itself looked as if 100-ton gun had been at work upon it. Of our chimneys cracked, as if a shot had hit it, flew, and a piece of it came clattering down the tiles and made a heap of broken red fragments upon the lower flower bed by my study window. I and my wife stood amazed. Then I realized that the crest of Mayberry Hill must be within range of the Martians' heat ray, now that the college was cleared out of the way. At that, I gripped my wife's arm and without ceremony ran her into the road. Then I fetched out the servant, telling her I would go upstairs myself for the box she was clamoring for. "We can't possibly stay here," I said, and as I spoke, the firing reopened for a moment upon the common. "But where are we to go?" said my wife in terror. I thought, perplexed. Then I remembered her cousins at Leatherhead. "Leatherhead," I shouted above the sudden noise. She looked away from me downhill. The people were coming out of the houses, astonished. "How are we to get to Leatherhead?" she said. Down the hill, I saw a bevy of hussars ride under the railway bridge. 3 galloped through the open gates of the Oriental College. 2 others dismounted and began running from house to house. The sun, shining through the smoke that drove up from the tops of trees, seemed blood red, and threw an unfamiliar, lurid light upon everything. "Stop here," said I. "You are safe here," and I started off at once for the Spotted Dog, for I knew the landlord had a house and a dog cart. For I perceived that in a moment everyone upon this side of the hill would be moving. I found him in his bar, quite unaware of what was going on behind his house. A man stood with his back to me, talking to him. "I must have £1, said the landlord, "and I have no one to drive it." "I'll give you 2, said I, over the stranger's shoulder. "What for?" "And I'll bring it back by midnight," I said. "Lord," said the landlord, "what's the hurry? I'm selling my bit of a pig, £2, and you bring it back? What's going on now?" I explained hastily that I had to leave my home, and so secured the dog cart. At the time, it did not seem to me nearly so urgent that a landlord should leave his. I took care to have the cart there and then, and drove it down the road, and leaving it in charge of my wife and servant, rushed into my house and packed a few valuables, such plate as we had, and so forth. The beech trees below the house were burning while I did this, and the palings up the road glowed red. While I was occupied in this way, one of the dismounted hussars came running up. He was going from house to house, warning people to leave. He was going on as I came out my front door, lugging my treasures, doorknob and tablecloth, and I shouted after him, "What news?" He turned, stared, bawled something about crawling out in the thing like a dish cover, and ran onto the gate of the house at the crest. A sudden whirl of black smoke driving across the road hid him for a moment. I ran to my neighbor's door and rapped to satisfy myself of what I already knew, that his wife had gone to London with him and had locked up at her house. I went in again, according to my promise, to get my servant's box, lugged it out, clapped it beside her on the tail of the dog cart, and then caught on the reins and jumped onto the driver's seat beside my wife. In another moment, we were clear of the smoke and noise and spanking down the opposite slope of Mayberry Hill towards old Woking. In front was a quiet, sunny landscape, a wheat field ahead on either side of the road, and the Mayberry Inn with its swinging sign. I saw the doctor's cart ahead of me. At the bottom of the hill, I turned my head to look at the hillside I was leaving. The thick streamers of black smoke, shot with threads of red fire, driving up into the still air, and throwing dark shadows upon the green treetops eastward. The smoke already extended far away to the east and west, to the Byfleet pine woods eastward, and to Woking on the west. The road was dotted with people running towards us, and very faint now, but distinct through the hot, quiet air, one heard the whir of a machine gun that was presently stilled, and an intermittent crackling of rifles. Apparently, the marshals were setting fire to everything within range of their heat ray. I am not an expert driver, but I had immediately to turn my attention to the horse. When I looked back again, the second hill had hidden the black smoke. I slashed the horse with the whip and gave him a loose rein until Woking and Send lay between us and the quivering tumult. I overtook and passed the doctor between Woking and Send. And that was chapter 9. All right. I'm going to do one more chapter. I'm thinking probably 10 chapters at a time. One more chapter, and then I will call it there. So, should we just get into it? What do you guys think? Alrighty. Chapter 10, In the Storm. Leatherhead is about 12 miles from Mayberry Hill. The scent of hay was in the air through the lush meadows beyond Hereford, and the hedges on either side were sweet and gay with multitude of dog roses. The heavy firing that had broken out while we were driving down Mayberry Hill ceased as abruptly as it began, leaving the evening very peaceful and still. We got to the Leatherhead without misadventure about 9 o'clock, and the horse had an hour's rest while I took supper with my cousins and commended my wife to their care. My wife was curiously silent throughout the drive and seemed oppressed with forebodings of evil. I talked to her reassuringly, pointing out that the Martians were tied to the pit by sheer heaviness, and at the utmost could but crawl a little out of it, but she answered only in monosyllables. Had it not been for my promise to the innkeeper, she would, I think, have urged me to stay in Leatherfield that night. Would that I had. Her face, I remember, was very white as we parted. For my own part, I had been feverishly excited all day. Something very like the war fever that occasionally runs through a civilized community had got into my blood, and in my heart I was not so very sorry that I had to return to Mayberry that night. I was even afraid that the last fusillade I had heard might mean the extermination of our invaders from Mars. I can best express my state of mind by saying that I wanted to be in at the death. It was nearly 11 when I started to return. The night was unexpectedly dark to me, walking out of the lighted passage of my cousin's house. It seemed indeed black, but it was as hot and close as the day. Overhead, the clouds were driving fast, albeit not a breath stirred the shrubs about us. My cousin's man lit both lamps. Happily, I knew the road intimately. My wife stood in the light of the doorway and watched me until I jumped into the dog cart, then abruptly turned and went in, leaving my cousins side by side, wishing me a good hap. I was a little depressed at first with the contagion of my wife's fears, but very soon my thoughts reverted to the Martians. At the time, I was absolutely in the dark as to the course of the evening's fighting. I did not know even the circumstances that had precipitated the conflict. As I came through Occam for that was the way I returned, and not through Send and Old Woking, I saw along the western horizon a blood-red glow, which, as I drew near, crept slowly up the sky. The driving clouds of the gathering thunderstorm mingled there with the masses of black and red smoke. Ripley Street was deserted, and except for a lighted window or so, the village showed not a sign of life. But I narrowly escaped an accident at the corner of the road to Pierford, where not a people stood with their backs to me. They said nothing to me as I passed. I do not know what they knew of the things happening beyond the hill, nor do I know the silent houses I passed on my way were sleeping securely, or deserted and empty, or harassed and watching against the terror of the night. From Ripley until I came through the Pierford, I was in the valley of the Way, and the red glare was hidden from me. As I ascended the little hill beyond Pierford Church, the glare came into view again, and the trees about me shivered with the first intimation of the storm that was upon me. Then I heard midnight pealing out from the Pierford Church behind me, and then came the silhouette of Mayberry Hill, with its treetops and roofs black and sharp against the red. Even as I beheld, a lurid green glare lit the road about me and showed the distant woods towards Addlestone. Felt a tug at the reins. I saw that the driving clouds not responding to that, Milk, but thank you. Thank you for coming in and chatting. Even as I beheld, this lurid green glare lit the road about me and showed the distant woods towards Addlestone. Felt the tug at the reins. I saw that the driving clouds had been pierced, as it were, by a thread of green fire, suddenly lighting their confusion and falling into the field to my left. It was a third falling star. Close on its apparition, and blinding violet by contrast, dancing out the first lightning of the gathering storm. The thunder burst like a rocket overhead. The horse took the bit between his teeth and bolted. A moderate incline runs towards the foot of Mayberry Hill, and down this we clattered. Once the lightning had begun, it went on in as rapid a succession of flashes as I have ever seen. The thunderclaps treading one on the heels of another, with a strange crackling accompaniment, sounded more like the working of a gigantic electric machine than the usual detonating reverberations. The flickering light was blinding and confusing. A thin hail smote gustily at my face as I drove down the slope. At first, I regarded little but the road before me. Then abruptly my attention was arrested by something that was moving rapidly down the opposite slope of Mayberry Hill. At first, I took it for the wet roof of a house, but one flashing followed another, it to be a swift rolling movement. It was an elusive vision, a moment of bewildering darkness, and then in a flash, like daylight, the red masses of the orphanage near the crest of the hill, the green tops of pine trees, and this problematic object came out, clear and sharp and bright. And this thing I saw, how can I describe it? A monstrous tripod higher than many houses, striding over the young pine trees and smashing them aside in its career. A walking engine of glittering metal, starting now across the heather, articulate ropes of steel dangling from it, and a clattering tumult of its passage mingling with the riot of the thunder. A flash, and it came out vividly, heeling over one way with 2 feet in the air, to vanish and reappear almost instantly, and as it seemed, with the next flash 100 yards nearer. Can you imagine a milking stool tilted and bowled violently along the ground? That was the impression those instant flashes gave. But instead of milking stool, imagine it a great body of machinery on a tripod stand. Then suddenly, the trees in the pine wood ahead of me were parted, as brittle reeds were parted by a man thrusting through them. They were snapped off and driven headlong, and a second huge tripod appeared, rushing, as it seemed, headlong towards me. Not stopping to look again, I wrenched the horse's head hard round to the right, and in another movement, the dog cart had heeled over upon the house. The shaft smashed noisily, and I was flung sideways and fell heavily into a shallow pool of water. I crawled out almost immediately and crouched, my feet still in the water, under a clump of firs. The horse lay motionless. His neck was broken, poor brute. In my lightning flashes, I saw the black bulk of an overturned dog cart and the silhouette of a wheel still spinning slowly. In another moment, the colossal mechanism was striding towards me and passed uphill towards Pureford. Walmart is taking forever. Oh, are they? Oh no, that's okay. Seen near, the thing was incredibly strange, for it was no mere insensate machine driving on its way. Machine it was, with a ringing metallic pace, and long, flexible, and glittering tentacles, one of which gripped a young pine tree, swinging and rattling about its strange body. It picked its road as it went striding along, and the brazen hood that surrounded it moved to and fro, with an inevitable suggestion of a head looking about. Behind the main body was a huge mass of white metal, like a gigantic fisherman's net. The puffs of green smoke squirted from the joints of the limbs as the monster swept by me, and in an instant, it was gone. So much I saw then, all vaguely for the flickering of lightning and blinding highlights and dense black shadows. As it passed, it set up an exulting, deafening howl that droned the thunder, "Alloo! Alloo!" And in another minute, it was with its companion half a mile away, stooping over something in the field. I have no doubt this thing in the field was the third of the 10 cylinders that had fired at us from Mars. For some minutes I lay there in the rain and darkness, watching, by the intermittent light, these monstrous beings of metal moving about in the distance over the hedge tops. A thin hail was now beginning. As it came and went, their figures grew misty, and they flashed into clearness again. Now and then came a gap in the lightning, and the night swallowed them up. I was soaked with hail above and puddled water below. It was some time before my blank astonishment would let me struggle up the bank to a drier position, or think at all of my imminent peril. Not far from me was a little one-room squatter's hut of wood, surrounded by a patch of potato garden. I struggled to my feet at last, and crouching, making use of every chance to cover, I made a run for this. I hammered at the door, and I could not make the people hear there were any people inside. And after a time, I desisted, and availing myself of a ditch for a greater part of the way, succeeding in crawling, unobserved by these monstrous machines, into the pine woods towards Maybury. Under cover of this, I pushed on, wet and shivering now, towards my own house. 1 second. I walked among the trees, trying to find the footpath. It was very dark indeed in the wood, The lightning was now becoming infrequent, and the hail, which was pouring down in the torrent, fell in columns through the gaps in the heavy foliage. If I had fully realized the meaning of all the things I had seen, I should have immediately worked my way around the Byfleet to straight Cobham, and so gone back to rejoin my wife at Leatherhead. But that night, the strangeness of things about me and my physical wretchedness prevented me, for I was bruised, weary, wet to the skin, deafened, and blinded by the storm. I had a vague idea of going on to my own house, and that was as much motive as I had. I had staggered through the trees, fell into a ditch, and bruised my knees against a plank, and finally splashed out into the lane that ran down from the College Arms. I say splashed, for the storm water was sweeping the sand down the hill in a muddy torrent. There, in the darkness, a man blundered into me and sent me reeling back. He gave a cry of terror, sprang sideways, and rushed on before I could gather my wits sufficiently to speak to him. So heavy was the stress of the storm just at this place that I had the hardest task to win my way up the hill. I went close up to the fence on the left and worked my way along its palings. Near the top, I stumbled upon something soft, and by a flash of lightning saw between my feet a heap of black broadcloth and a pair of boots. Before I could distinguish clearly how the man lay, the flickering of light had passed. I stood over him, waiting for the next flash. When it came, I saw that he was a sturdy man, cheaply but not shabbily dressed. His head was bent under his body, and he lay crumpled up close to the fence, as though he had been flung violently against it. Overcoming the repugnance natural to one who had never touched a dead body, I stooped, turned him over to feel for his heart. He was quite dead. Apparently his neck had been broken. The lightning flashed for a third time, and his face leaped upon me. I sprang to my feet. It was the landlord of the spotted dog, whose conveyance I had taken. I stepped over him gingerly and pushed on up the hill. I made my way to the police station and the College Arms towards my own house. Nothing was burning on the hillside, though from the common there still came a red glare and a rolling tumult of ruddy smoke beating up against the drenching hail. So far as I could see by the flashes, the houses about me were mostly uninjured. By the College Arms, a dark heap lay on the road. Down the road towards Maybury Bridge, there were voices and the sound of feet. I had not the courage to shout or go to them. I let myself in with my latchkey, closed, locked, and bolted the door. Staggered toward the foot of the staircase and sat down. My imagination was full of those striding metallic monsters, and of the dead body smashed against the fence. I crouched at the foot of the staircase with my back to the wall, shivering violently. Okay. So, that was chapter 10. We made great progress through this book. I'm really excited about it, but I do have to call it there, guys. So I really appreciate everybody who's here. Appreciate all of you. I really do. And I hope that you guys can be here for the next stream. And I will definitely see you guys later. Bye, guys.